All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of New Ideas. Happy New Year, everyone. And today is going to be my first guest for the new year of 2026 is Dr. Pat Choate, who is an economist. He was a vice presidential running mate to Ross Perot in the 1996 presidential election. And Pat has advised a number of corporate clients and government at all levels on economic infrastructure and trade policy. He's involved with many nonprofits, including, I believe, the Coalition for a Prosperous America at one point. He's done work with Economy in Crisis and other economic and trade reform groups. Welcome back, Pat. How are you doing today? And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, and it's good to be with you, Nevin.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us. As you know, since we last talked, quite a bit has transpired on the economic front, the political front, the foreign policy on the Trump administration. Now, from a grade to an A to an F, how would you give the Trump administration and Congress's reactions and dealings with the Trump administration?
Well, at this point, it would be to grade on what purpose. If it is a purpose of making structural changes, Trump has he gets an A for his effectiveness in doing it. He has done what many presidents have refused to do, but only a handful have done, such as Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and FDR. He just bullied through the changes. And so, and many of those will remain. So, on that, it is very good. As to his policies that he is putting into place, from my perspective as a student of policy, he gets an F. He has broken our relationships, our longstanding relationships with Canada, Mexico, NATO. He has, in effect, created a situation where other nations do not trust our word. They do not trust our alliances as such. And the same thing is happening on, I believe, many domestic policies that are important to the country. So on that, it's an F. If you put it all together, I would say that the major thing that Trump is going to accomplish with this 4 years of the second term is he is going to set up a dynamic for major permanent institutional changes and policy changes by the next president. Our system of politics and institutions operates with long periods of accepting the status quo, and then we'll have a major transformative shift. It's happened with the Civil War and the issue of slavery. It happened on the question of women's rights, the very idea that women would have the rights to vote. It happened on civil rights in the 1960s, and it is going to happen after Trump. And I think what we're going to have is a very productive period of changes that will operate under the rubric of building a more perfect union. Trump has identified major flaws in our series of assumptions and expectations on the Constitution. Many of those are going to have to be converted into law as such. The Emoluments Clause, for example, which prohibits a president or federal office taking anything of value from any foreign source or government or entity, has never, at this point, been converted to law. It's amazing, 249 years old, and there was no need for this. You wound up just in a situation where a president, if he was receiving a gift would go to Congress and asked for the gift, or a foreign or a U.S. official or a notable person. Louis XV wanted to give Benjamin Franklin a snuff box, a jewel snuff box, for example, and Congress says no, you can't do it. Abraham Lincoln from I think Tibet received two magnificent ivory tusks. He asked Congress. Congress says no, you can't take the ivory tusk. And yet we see at this point all of the personal deals that Trump and his family are making. And so that needs to be converted into legislation that say it can't be done. It needs to be made operational. And there's going to be a whole series of things on operational of agencies. Can they do warrantless entries of homes? Can they, in effect, work as an occupying force as they're doing in Minneapolis? We're going to see some of those changes, I think, in the appropriations bill for Homeland Security, but they're going to be indicative or representative of a whole series of such changes, which I suspect the president after 2029 and the Congress after 29. And overall, that is a very good thing, is you're setting bounds on our public officials. You're keeping them honest. You're identifying their interactions with the constitutions, what they can and cannot do. The Constitution says that the date and method of voting is reserved to the states, for the Congress, and for the president. Trump is challenging that, as he's done by, as he's preparing to do by, in effect, trying to overrun the states in places such as Georgia. That's going to wind up getting clarified. What does that constitutional provision really, absolutely, what are the bounds on that? And all of that is to the good for a functioning democratic republic.
No, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. That's a good way to look at it. Now, the big question is who in the opposition party, since we don't really see any force for reform in the Republican Party. I mean, a few senators, maybe like Josh Hawley.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Everything very good, okay?
Good. Sorry.
No, you're good. No problem. So, my question is that my point would be, are there going to be forces within the Republican Party that are going to carry the mantle of reform that you and I support? And it seems like in the Senate so far, there are very few of those, if any. In the House, maybe perhaps some who might see the handwriting on the wall on how Trumpism and MAGA has become so toxic in the eyes of the public on institutional levels, from the ideas of capitalism, from the ideas of ICE and ICE immigration enforcement, on tariffs. I had high hopes for the first Trump administration. I publicly supported him, as you know, as many know in the audience, in 2015, 2016. I publicly advocated for Trump with concerns and questions, but still publicly advocated him, primarily because of the policies that he had advocated ever since the 1980s. But he has done, on particularly domestic economics, huge reversals. And now what I'm seeing also, Pat, from a lot of MAGA supporters and Republicans on social media, sometimes even in person, as well as the Trump administration and Trump himself, is this callousness towards the younger generation. For example, he made remarks recently about the housing market, that he refuses to let the prices of housing fall so more people can afford it. He wants to keep the remaining homeowners wealthy. And I think that goes into a bigger question on what is the role of housing? Should it just merely be an asset to be inflated constantly as much as possible? Or is it also a means of also generational wealth, as well as also literally shelter for people who need it and to also develop families. So I see a real crisis at our hands with the legitimacy in our institutions. We have many people who have taken to making videos on Facebook, TikTok in particular, and Twitter X, where people are angry. They're like literally saying they don't care. They want to enact violent revolution. And there are groups that are very radical that are behind or certainly play a role in a number of these protests against Trump and some of his more controversial policies like the PSL and the DSA have been involved. So they're capitalizing. So I see a domestic legitimacy and national security threat. Now, we've been through this in our history before. My question is are we going to have an FDR that exists in the Democratic or Republican parties? And are they going to say enact the changes that we really desperately need? Because you're right, we need these reforms, the emoluments clause, where it has to be legislated. It actually has to be enforced, to be honest. We have many laws on the books, like antitrust laws, that haven't been enforced for 40 to 50 years. So where do you see, now you do work with various legislators on the Hill, in Congress, in the Senate, and to allay my concerns as me being Joe citizen / intellectual, does anybody out there that's like an FDR that really, or a coalition that could step up to the plate and really enact the reforms that we've needed that have been long overdue for the past 40 to 50 years?
They exist in both Republican and Democratic parties. Just as full disclosure, I was the economic advisor for 3 Republican governors, Henry Bellman, Dewey Bartlett, and Winfield Dunn, Oklahoma and Tennessee. Worked for Nixon, worked for Ford, was on 3 presidential commissions for Reagan, and have assisted several Democratic candidates, been advisor to them, and of course to Ross Perot. So, I've seen it pretty well across the spectrum, Republican, Democrat, independents as such. For the Republican Party, absolutely. There are many very good people inside the Republican Party. And basically what happens and what has happened to them is they see that the base of the Republican Party is not ready for change, that their political careers or their opportunity to make change will be squelched by attacks by Reagan and by Trump's use of the Justice Department and other vengeful, inappropriate, illegal means to quash them. The MAGA movement itself is being pushed aside. It will be pushed aside by independent voters as such. And for the Republican Party to have influence long term, it's going to need to recapture those voters, recapture the conservative voters, and bring them back. Otherwise, they will not have a future. And the thing that to me is interesting is there's no one inside the Republican Party to lead the MAGA movement that can unify the MAGA movement when Trump is gone from the scene. On the Democratic side, there are many people that are vying and that have the capacity to do it. One of the people I think people are not paying enough attention to, and I think it's in part by the design, is Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. His father was governor 2 terms. He's been governor 2 terms. Political astuteness and sensitivity is built into his DNA. He's head of the Democratic Governors Association. He has a long reach. He is not accruing any negatives at this point. He will have substantial money behind him. I think that the next candidate for president for Democrat is going to come from Democratic governors. I think it's going to be a Newsom. It's going to be The governor of Illinois is going to be the governor of Kentucky. I think those are the leaders, and each one of them has the power to do it. Remember, also with FDR, is you wound up when Roosevelt won. Walter Lippmann, who was the great pundit of the first half of the 20th century, went and met with Roosevelt, and he did a famous column in which he said he didn't think that Roosevelt had the character or the intellectual capacity or the leadership skills to really do much. Well, he totally transformed our government as such. That
Indeed.
capacity is there. I mean, the leaders are there. Now it's a question, are the followers there? And I think the followers, which means the voters, the people that puts the leader in, I think by the time we get to the end of Trump 2, they're going to be ready for some major changes.
And I think the economy is going to push that along, the economic indicators. I was recently saw a headline for Fortune magazine where it said that that Gen Z should no longer go to college because there's no more school to college pipeline. And that really raised my eyebrows because my daughter goes to Savannah College of Art and Design, and she's making top grades. She's finishing up an internship at the Disney College program, did very well with there. That's a very rigorous program. And that concerns me and many other parents, such as myself, parents and grandparents, such as yours. And so this is certainly, nevertheless, very good news. But I think there will be potentially an opening for positive reform. But I think, as we've talked about in previous programs, the problem is pushing plutocracy aside. And what needs to happen, in my opinion, there needs to be, it's going to take tremendous political capital, but we might get there by force of circumstances. Where you have talked about the Pecora Commission and other commissions during the 1930s and 1940s, we're going to have about at least 5 of those simultaneously to really peel away the corruption and the rot and the hollowing out of our system that has occurred ever since the neoliberal epoch started in the last years of President Carter. And we have to take a look at so many different things, how financialization has totally destroyed our economy for average people. Ever since Carter started to financialize the economy with the Banking and Monetary Act of 1980, we have to look at our trade imbalances, which started, older than, frankly, than I am, and I'm 51, and I was born 1974, to give you an idea when the trade imbalances started. For those in the audience, I know you know that, of course. That's one of your wheelhouses. We have to take a look at the national security issues. We take a look at Trump right now, and you touched upon it in your introductory comments. He is like a ricocheting bullet on different issues related to national security. He's highly inconsistent. There doesn't seem to be a coordinated plan to really deal with Russia and China. He has people in his administration, some of who are very good on the issues of the threats of China and Russia, like Marco Rubio and Peter Navarro. But then you have others that are just really questionable, like Darren Beatty and Tulsi Gabbard and others. And then you have basically hyper-caffeinated Reaganomics people like Kevin Hassett, who is one of the advisors on economics. And you have other elements of the Wall Street elite, and of course, Elon Musk and David Sachs and Bill Ackman and others from big tech that are advising him. And these are fundamentally hyper-caffeinated Reaganomics type of people. And, there has to be somebody with enough political capital to educate people, because it's almost like you have to deprogram large amounts of Americans on how, at one time in this country, from the 1940s until the early 1980s, that we had a real balanced national form of capitalism, and it kept the social peace. It kept radicals at bay on the economic questions. But then there was that separation, And as the statistics show, you have more anger towards the system since the late 1970s, however contained it was. You have the buildup of Russia, China, realizing that the Cold War never really ended. It just kind of mutated into the 1990s. And you also have the separation since 1979. Many people have done quite a bit of research on this, the EPI, the Economic Policy Institute, and others. The separation, especially since 1979, of productivity and wage growth. So we have to re-educate people on, I hate to use that term, on the importance of unions, the importance of regulations, that government always is not always the problem. It can be often the solution. It's like what Elizabeth Warren was really good on economics. What she had said in a very well-known statement, it's not a question of big government or small government, but it's who the government works for. And that is so important. And we need and this is one of the reasons why I have my program. And for those of you who don't know in the audience, I'm developing my own in real life group when I'm going to be moving down to the Miami area from Broward County, Florida, because I feel the need that there needs to be educational and civic efforts to really provide an alternative explanation of really what has gone wrong in the country. But I also agree with you, Pat, and I'll let you talk afterwards. The country, as I pointed out in my first essay in my Substack, What is Radical Civic Nationalism? The country has many, many different hidden assets. You have a lot of brilliant minds out there. You have a lot of people that are concerned, they're upset, and that could be energy that's harnessed, hopefully in a positive direction in the political world. We also have still a strong sense of inventiveness and entrepreneurship, as you have mentioned on the show before. And there are many other examples. Now, on the issue of trade, which has always been in your wheelhouse for a very long time, I have concerns about Trump because on the one hand, he has put tariffs on steel, on aluminum, on other products that are necessary. But he has also used tariffs as a temper tantrum, like the noted 10% tariff on Denmark, which really doesn't serve much of an economic purpose, or even, I would argue, an immediate national security purpose. And my concern is, frankly, Pat, with the abuses of ICE, and I'm not one of the individuals that believes ICE should be abolished or internal border enforcement, but we know that the Trump administration, from memos that have been leaked, that the Trump administration has lessened and reduced the number of hours, days, and weeks of training, of professional training of these ICE agents, the new class of ICE agents, to the point where the old school INS and ICE people are upset. You see how tariffs are being hastily applied, but there's no additional industrial policy to definancialize the economy and incentivize production as opposed to financial speculation. So my concern, Pat, and I want you to comment on everything I said, if you so see fit. My concern is it's going to discredit the cause of economic nationalism, and the Democrats are just going to go flat out against all industrial policy, all tariffs, and really just abolish ICE and internal border enforcement rather than looking at the problem in a practical fashion. What do you see on the ground in Washington, D.C., as well as what are your thoughts concerning my views here?
Well, the first thing is what we had come out of Davos, the World Economic Forum, is the Prime Minister of Canada gave probably the most important economic and strategic speech since George Kennan gave his memo in 1947, which defined the Cold War. And basically, what the Prime Minister said was that after World War II, the United States and Great Britain built a world order that was an image of the Anglo-American rules-based model.
Mm-hmm.
And that one of our objectives was to take that model and basically have or induce the rest of the world to adopt that model. We wanted the socialist model of Europe, France, Scandinavia to adopt it. We wanted the communist model of the Soviet Union to adopt it. We wanted the centrally planned economies of Japan to adopt that model. And we went through a whole series of trade negotiations culminating in the creation of the World Trade Organization. And in the process of that, we really realized by the mid 70s that the rest of the world did not want to be like the Great Britain or the United States. They wanted their own culture, they wanted their own economic models. They were comfortable with it. Some of them have had it for centuries. And fundamentally, we played along and they played along with the fiction that we were operating under a rules-based model when we were not. We were making exceptions. We tried to seduce China into this in 2000 when we brought them into the World Trade Organization and treated them as a developing state with all the privileges that a small developing country would have in coming into it. And so, but that fiction is now over. What we really have is hegemons. We have China as a hegemon. Europe is basically a hegemon. The United States is basically a hegemon. And what we've done is promoted programs where we attempt to control the middle countries and we attempt to deal with the other major hegemon countries by putting in rules on how we'll handle data. It's the United States controls banking and sets rules if you want to do. We are very strict on that. We set up supply chains to control others. We've tried to control China by the export of computer chips. They can try to control us by the control of rare earths. And China tries to do it, and Germany tries to do it by really advanced and well engineered technologies. And so, fundamentally, through supply lines, through control of materials, through banking, etc., what you see is a modern version of mercantilism playing out between the hegemons, and we're forcing all of the middle powers to deal with that. What is now clear, that is what's happening. And it is very clear that the World Trade Organization is totally inappropriate. Its rules, its treaties, etc., its dispute settlement mechanisms are totally inappropriate to the situation. So now we're into a situation for the United States. We must rethink that. Trump can't do it. Trump administration is not going to do it. Many core Democrats are not doing it because their careers are so tied to advancing, and they profit and they make their livings off of the rules-based fiction that exists. And so but there is inside the Democratic Party this awareness that these policies have wiped out our industrial base. When we started with NAFTA and the World Trade Organization, we had about 19 million manufacturing workers. We're down to about 11 million manufacturing workers, and we lost manufacturing workers this past year. Our trade deficit is one of the worst ever that we're running right now. Trump's programs are not working to deal with this. We're losing out in industry after industry, becoming dependent in our defense industrial base on technology after technology. On Trump's birthday, when we had that military parade that went down Constitution Avenue, I watched that and I thought to myself, what you have on wheels here is the Maginot Line of 1940 inside France. We've just put it on mobile. the tanks, the troop carriers, the planes that we were showing, at that very moment, were being shown to be obsolete for military strategy by Ukraine and Russia with their drones and their drone strategies. Very much as happened in World War II when France built this expensive, long, fortified line that would have been appropriate for World War One, but German tanks just got around the edges and took France in a matter of days. We're unprepared to fight a modern war. I mean, we're ultimately, as Europe is, we have a limited capacity to fight because of rare earths in production and our reliance on expensive weapons that take so long. We're probably good for 6 months. I mean, if you're really interested in this, I would say to your audience, go to any of the AI and say, given the restrictions that we face on critical minerals and our dependence on critical minerals, estimate how long a sustained war that the United States could have with China or any other major power. You'll be very frightened when you go through that. All that needs to be rethought. All that needs to be rethought. This is the moment for the Democrats, once they gain control of Congress, to do the rethinking of that. And basically, to my mind's eye, what they should be doing is they're going to have hearing power. The Trump administration is not going to share. They're going to be resistance. But what you do in those hearings, you take a whole series of efforts and you use that 2-year period to develop your own version of Project 2025, as the Republicans did with the Heritage Foundation. Mm-hmm. And so if the Democrats take control in 2029, as they're highly likely to do, then you have a staff of people, you have programs, you have ideas, and you move in as Franklin Roosevelt did with his 100-day program. When you go back and read the history of Roosevelt, he put together the New Deal in his last 2 years as governor in New York. He formed a brain trust. He brought some of the smartest, best people in, and fundamentally he created a plan and he put it in the first 100 days. Next president needs to do the same thing. And that's how you begin this process of creating the institutional and reforms that are going to be required. And in doing that, you'll find a large number of Republicans who are no longer fearful of Trump that'll join in that process. Enough to make it bipartisan.
Yeah, is usually, or we'll take a catastrophe that'll galvanize us into action. And of course, a recent point of history was the Great Depression to galvanize us. I mean, Churchill had a famous quip. I'm probably going to mangle his quote, but he reputedly said it, in the late 1940s, that basically the Americans will do the right thing after everything else has been tried, or everything else fails. It fails, exactly. But yeah, I mean, to piggyback on your point on the lack of preparedness in the defense industrial base, and that's something I document on some of my Substack papers, as you know, on my Substack page called Wilderness of Mirrors. And this problem, I mean, this is a little trip down memory lane for you, Pat, I'm sure. The U.S. Army Chief of General Staff, General John A. Wickham Jr., you may remember him. He observed back in June 1987 that the U.S. Army, quote, would run out of supplies after only a few months of intense fighting because there is no national production base to support it. That's how unbelievable the problem is. And it's only been worse. You mentioned Ukraine. You mentioned, well, you didn't mention Taiwan, but here's the situation with Taiwan. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, that our defense industrial base could not aid in the defense of Taiwan, since we would run out of important long-range precision-guided munitions in less than 1 week.
Yes,
The problem is real.
it is very real, and it's there. I mean, literally, it's known. In 1990, I was vice chairman of the Defense Science Board study on our vulnerability for dependence on foreign-based parts, and we published a report. It's secret, but I report what the New York Times reported on is that we had a limited capacity. Is that what we were doing? Is we were depending on Asian sources. And that had happened because we'd made a very foolish decision. We didn't really want a domestically based supply. What we wanted is the cheapest price that we could get on the goods that would meet the standards. And so we did not put source as a basis of doing that. And I understand from what I read. I have no special contacts or insights at DoD any longer, but that they're rushing as fast as they can to develop capacity on drones. Well, you just say to yourself, how did we get caught out in this situation? I did a study for the U.S.
This is a reminder. I have a show with Nevin Gossip at 2 p.m. This is a reminder.
My computer's reminding me that I have a show with you, Nevin.
Better late than never.
Better late. But in which I did an analysis of advanced technology, and this is available on the line. U.S.-China Economic Security Commission. Just Pat Choate, and it was on the critical components on the 10 categories of advanced technologies. And when I did that, literally in every major sensitive category, we were deficient. We couldn't mount a campaign. You see all of these documentaries about World War II. The reason that we could win that war is that we could be the arsenal of democracy. We can't do that today.
That's correct. That's correct. And another problem is not only trade, but it's also the Defense Department, defense contractors, as late as even 2023, in various defense firms have spent more on their profits on stock buybacks,
Yes,
than production of new weapons.
yes.
What is up with that? You want to comment on that issue there?
Well, I agree strongly with Trump. You set limits on the pay of the defense contractors. The very idea that defense contractor CEOs are making millions of dollars per year, when in effect they're an extension of government and producing and being our arsenal, that they're making such good profits that they're focused on keeping prices up rather than taking that money and putting it back into R&D activities. It's an absolute scandal.
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, and there is some movement in the right direction, but not enough. But there is some, and there are some people in the MAGA commentator base and people who post on social media. Not enough, but there is a little bit of movement. And I'll be blunt. There needs to be a clean, complete, and total break with Reaganomics in the Republican Party. There needs to be an autopsy, a funeral. It needs to be done in a way that's fact-based and to just show that it didn't work. And perhaps in some of it was intended maybe not to work in the sense of creating production and really continue the shared but earned prosperity. And they just need to be done with it already. They just need to be blunt. It needs to be dumped overboard. And as you know, one of the policies of the Reagan administration was in 1982, as you remember, when stock buybacks were legalized, when John Shad was the head of the SEC. And I forget the rule, I think it's what, 10-18B or something or another. And that needs to be withdrawn, that safe harbor clause, and they need to, within a 5-year period, phase out and make illegal, again, stock buybacks. That's a big issue. And they also need to really take a look at all the tax cuts that were passed ever since the early 1980s, and particularly 1986 and onwards, that incentivize financial speculation over production. And that needs to be reversed too. Now, I'm not saying we should do it just overnight in a 24-hour period. That would cause a shock to the economy. You need time for the economy to adjust. So I'm pretty conservative in that sense and prudent. But there needs to be a course correction. There needs to be an autopsy, like you have pointed out, the Perot Commission on corruption and everything. There needs to be multiple commissions. But I think a major event hopefully will wake people up in Congress, in the House and the Senate, and in the states, state governors, state legislators, where it's like, okay, it's either a do or die moment. Now, I thought COVID would bring us to that point. It didn't. I thought the Great Recession would bring us to that point. I voted for Obama in 2008. Before then, I had never voted for a Democrat ever in my life. I thought he would be a new FDR because at that point, I started to question the wisdom of free trade and deregulation. That's when I read your book, Dangerous Business, by the way, Pat. And that was one of the books that converted my thinking, one of several books whose documentation, you literally impacted my life in that way.
I hope positively. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for educating us, the average citizens out there who are engaged, on really what has gone on in regards to economic history. Now, do you see, I don't think you're on social media much, if at all, but even when you can,
I've never been on social media.
when you converse with people, if you ever do converse with regular people about what's going on economically or politically, your family, again, when you hear the buzz in Washington, D.C., do you see the grassroots changing slowly? Do you hear, I know you kind of said the Republican base, no, but is there any flickers of hope, you think, in the Republican base? Any sectors? There's some people that kind of get it, but what do you think it will take for these people to wake the heck up and have a strong cup of coffee and open their eyes?
Pain, a lot of economic pain. That's our history. We don't make major changes unless we see pain. And it's happening. That's what this whole affordability issue is about. It's not just regional inside the industrial Midwest, which has been stripped out. But at the same time, our politicians have got to have some better ideas, new and better ideas on how to deal with this. One of the problems that we have is the ossification of the intellectual community. It's the ossification of the think tanks, the complex of people who advise politicians. I mean, this is a world I spent 40 plus years in. And you see, they are hesitant to check the status quo, free trade. They're hesitant to attack this blind ideological rush that we've had for 40 years to unfettered globalism. And it's tough because the companies and individuals that support these think tanks, benefit and profit. And in many cases, these think tanks are just there to provide intellectual perfume on really stinky ideas as such. So, uh, 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 as, but there's some core things that we can do that will right the ship automatically. And let me just go back to the financialization. We were talking about Reagan. What happened during the Reagan years? And I say this, I served on 3 Reagan commissions, and I was on a group of 10 people that put together Reagan's agenda, policy agenda for his second administration. I did the section on infrastructure. Is that basically they were captured by Milton Friedman. And there was a great debate that went on in the early 1970s that defined that. And that debate was between Friedman, who believed that the total responsibility of corporate executives was to enhance the value of the stock, make money for the investors. And on the other side was the head of Levi Jeans, the company that made the jeans, who very uh, socially conscious, had built a great company, and said that companies had a responsibility more than simply to maximize profit. They had to provide decent pay for their workers, not exploit them, decent benefits, make a contribution to the community, not pollute massively and leave the cost to the general public. Well, the Friedman side won on that. And you could see that in the velocity inside the New York Stock Exchange, inside our principal stock exchange. I did a book in the mid 80s called The High Flex Society. And one of the things I measured was just how fast the total value of the New York Stock Exchange turned over. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, the total value would not turn over. It'll be 4 years, and then it'd go down to 3 years or 10 years. And what that says is that investors were putting their in for long-term growth and long-term value. They were going for value. But you began to see that shift down into months in the 1980s. And eventually the New York Stock Exchange, when you went into all of these hedge funds and day traders and computerized training as such, the value of the stock market the whole value of the stock market was turning over in a matter of days as such. And so it was short-term speculation that was getting it. The incentives or the demands for long-term value, being patient, doing the R&D, building the facilities, building a workforce, establishing permanent supply chains and markets had decreased. And so it was a system that promoted greed. This is Garden Gecko in the movie in the 1980s. And so what I proposed, and I actually got some members of Congress to sponsor his legislation, but could not get it through the Congress, is a fact to change the capital gains tax in this country. Mm-hmm. And you deliberately set it out to focus on long-term value creation, long-term increase. And the way that I recommended doing it, and these are just illustrative numbers, we could model and calculate what this would do, is in the first year that the tax, the capital gains tax, if you sold it in the first year, it would be 50%. In the second year, 40, third year, 30, et cetera, and take it down to a 10%. So for those who invested long term, instead of a 22 or whatever the current rate is, it would be 10 cents. It would be better. And at the same time, you would put your thumb on the scale to have investment go into long-term investments. Do the R&D to build the next generation of research. Do the investment to build state-of-the-art modern plants that can compete with anything in the rest of the world. Do the networking and the supply chains and the marketing that you can do. That one change would change the behavior, because all Wall Street does, and it'll adapt to anything, all it does is want short-term profit. Greed dominates everything, and they cannot help themselves, and the incentives reinforce that. So you make a laser shot, a change like that, and you'll change the habits of the financial community. You'll change the manufacturing community as well. And it's that kind of thinking that we need both the Democratic and party advisors to be focusing on.
There are a few in the Senate and the House and the Democratic side that are good on that issue, at least on the surface. They get it. Elizabeth Warren has made her career of that. She used to be a believer in free market neoliberalism, and what changed her view, as you may know, was actually doing a study on bankruptcy. Yeah. And when she learned about bankruptcies, that it wasn't just merely personal irresponsibility, but there were structural issues involved, she changed her mind and she reverted more to supporting, instead of the Milton Friedman style capitalism, she then continued to support free markets, but more on the model that you and I support. So you have Elizabeth Warren, you have Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut. He has been starting to at least verbally beat the drums on industrial policy, on the threat of Russia and China, and as well as on the financialization of the economy and deindustrialization. Now, Bernie Sanders comes more from somewhat the left than you and I, but he has also beat the drums on deindustrialization and financialization. I would argue that he's not a real socialist. When you look at his discourse since 1990, he has moved to the right on that issue economically. He has become more of a supporter of a sort of social capitalism.
Evan, may we take just a break here?
Sure, of course. I'm going to make some coffee right now. I'll be right back. Okay, well, I'm going to continue a little bit here while we wait for Pat and while I wait for my coffee. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us here. And there was another item I wanted to point out about the financialization, particularly of the defense industrial base. It was even the first Trump administration in fiscal year 2019 Industrial Capabilities Report to Congress implicated the financialization of the economy, meaning the focus on short-term profits, lack of coordinated national planning, and lack of concern towards underinvestment in critical sectors of our economy. And it was through national security, as many of you know, that I came to reject neoliberalism or Reaganomics, whichever you want to call it, and support more of the balanced and nationalist capitalism that domestically is based upon or supportive of what I term shared but earned prosperity. So there was another example where you had Bill Hickey, who was an owner of a metal fabricator processing firm He recalled in a conversation he had with an admiral who commanded the American submarine fleet. And when Trump increased the military budget, the Navy realized that they cannot produce the high-end castings for more submarines. Well, why? Well, as Hickey recalled, the LBO, or leverage buyout guys, which is basically private equity, bought up manufacturing facilities in the 1990s and moved them to China. As Hickey lamented, the middle-class Americans who did the manufacturing work, all that capability, machine tools, knowledge, it just became worthless, driven by the stock price. The national ability to produce is a national treasure. If you can't produce, you won't consume, and you can't defend yourself. And there's literally thousands of pieces of information that Pat, that myself, that many others preceding us have documented consistently on how financialization of the economy is absolutely just has been it's been like a wooden stake in the heart of a vampire. It has literally killed our country and killing our economy. But the good news is that we have the intellectual core and capability of people within politics, business, labor. There is that core that has not been eroded. So there will be a time where our views are needed, our expertise, our activism, our drive, our zeal is needed again. And that's the good news. And that's what's on reserve. I was just talking to the people while making the coffee and doing your break.
Okay.
And like that. So it was a little monologue. And
no, I heard you. I agree with you. Most people don't understand what financialization of the economy did. You gave a very good explanation there and why it's important. If you can't make, you can't consume, and you can't defend yourself.
Well, and I wanted to talk to you about the defense, I know you take a realist view, but still a very concerned view towards Russia, towards China. I know you're not a fan of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua that currently run the country. I know you're not a fan of Cuba, the government, that is. Love the food, though, and the culture. And the same with Venezuela, as a matter of fact. We're not a fan of Chavez, Maduro, or Delcy Rodriguez. We're not a fan of Iran. But it seems like the Trump administration, from an outside point of view, it's very confused. There's definitely some good that he's doing, but also some bad. Part of it is that, look, I understand in Venezuela, you can't just throw out an entire leadership and expect a new one to sprout out. You have to have the opposition groups, of which there are several in Venezuela, gain real legitimacy with all segments of civil society. But on the other hand, what is Trump's real motives towards Venezuela? Because look, the way they're looking at it is money is being taken from the Venezuelan state-owned oil industry, and it's ultimately being put into an account in Qatar, far away Qatar. So it's like there's a lot of unanswered questions that I have that leave me uncomfortable, that makes the United States look like a sort of jingoistic colonialist power from the early 1900s, late 1800s, when we were wielding the big stick. It's like, look, I have no tears over Maduro. There have been a number of occasions where the Venezuelans have interfered and against American interests directly in the continent with funding extremist groups involved in cyber warfare, funding Middle Eastern terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, according to Venezuelan military defectors. So a lot of serious accusations, a lot of problematic facts, and a lot of areas are concerns and everything. The same with Cuba. Cuba, I mean, if there are demonstrations, growing riots, I would be for, look, I mean, in principle, I am for the denial of oil and other exports to Cuba. However, that's going to provoke even more suffering. And then we should be ready to alleviate the suffering of the people by overthrowing the government. Because if we want to literally do a literal blockade of Cuba, where they have only oil supplies enough for 15 or 20 days, the moral thing would do is to literally, and I don't like generally committing American troops if we need to go in, then we have to go in and literally toss out the government. But of course, there lies in the problem. Are there any opposition groups? Yes, there are in Miami, but they have the deep roots in Cuba to really gain legitimacy? And to me, is that what is really going to happen? Or is that going to provoke more of a refugee flight to the United States if we tighten the embargo? Now, the embargo, as I know you study trade, it's been vastly exaggerated by the left. Cuba has traded with American corporations since the 1970s through overseas subsidiaries. They've gotten loans from our NATO allies, from neutral countries. I mean, the notion that there was this American blockade is not true. It's an internal blockade. But regarding China, Russia, Ukraine, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, how would you grade the Trump administration's performance, and how would you handle all of these international issues? And take your time in explaining.
Well, the first thing I would say that if you're talking about creating a situation where you can have major reform, Trump gets an A plus in Venezuela. Does he seem to have a vision on what that should be? He gets an F minus on that. But what he has created is a situation in which real change can be made starting in Venezuela. The way that I see it is, first, he has gone on. Venezuela is important for this reason. It has the world's largest supplies of oil, period. It's more than Saudi Arabia, more than any other country in the Mideast. It's number one. Saudi Arabia is number two. Number three in oil reserves is Canada, in the north with their oil sands. And Canada is, I think, producing something like 3.5 million barrels of oil now. Venezuela is producing one. At one point, they were producing 4 million barrels of oil. Now, that's important because it lessens the role of Saudi Arabia and OPEC and their influence in the global economy as such. So being able to control that, to have a counterbalance on that, and to be able to hold that counterbalance for a long time is very important for the world as such. Now, at the present time, only 1 million barrels a day were being produced. Some of that sustained the economy. Some of that was stolen. Some of that sustained mischief. So at this point, we control the production and we control the revenues that have come out from that. There will be mischief in the Trump administration. He is doing it through Qatar, a bank account in Qatar, which is an insult to the American financial community and our economy as such. Qatar is the country that gave him a $400 million plane. The next administration must do a forensic exam of the accounts that have gone on, and just to make sure that none of that money has gone to the Trump family. And if it has, those involved must be indicted and sent to prison. There must be accountability for theft. But the reality is by 3 years, there will be a recognition of that. Now, going forward to the future, we need to negotiate an arrangement with Argentina where you can have massive investment by the global major oil companies. It's a cartel. I hate it, but that's the reality. That's how you get your oil, through the cartels. They drive it, with the independents and smaller companies being peripheral. The second thing is the monies should be put into a national trust fund, a sovereign wealth fund. And it should be managed and set up in a way as is done with Norway, which has one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds off the oil and gas in the North Sea. And the Norwegians have used that to benefit the people of Norway. We as trustees for the people of Argentina, for the nation of Argentina, should then work with the government there and demand democracy there. We should then begin with them in charge of doing a program of hospitals, roads, infrastructure, modernization, housing, employment, just as this enables that in the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, it will do the same thing. The goal is to create an educated, productive people in Venezuela and to have a fully modern democratic society there. If we will accept the role of trustee and set a goal of us turning that over to a responsible group of Venezuelans, as has happened in Norway and other countries with responsible sovereign funds, we can create major beneficial gains for Central and South America. What we need to do is remove, after 3 years, a management that is focused on profits for the oil companies and profits for those that are involved and associated with the Trump administration.
And I think that's, this is why I have you on the show, because you give the very thoughtful, very strategic, and well-informed policies. And that is perfectly crafted vision on how the oil revenues should be set up. You mentioned the Qatar. It's also an insult to the Venezuelan people. I mean, I date a woman from South America. I've dated Hispanic women. They are immigrants. They are very nationalistic. To me, that's tone deaf to put that money in Qatar. I understand we don't trust the current government of Delcy Rodriguez and Maduro and Chavez. And I get that. And you outlined why on the distribution of the oil revenues in your answer and your explanation. But we have to be very mindful of the South American mentality. How would we feel if we were conquered by or influenced or dominated by a foreign nation and that happened to us? And that's where we have to be very sensitive to the nationalism, not just for me, but also for thee too as well, while remaining anti-communist and very cognizant of our really strategic influence that we need to continue to have in the Western Hemisphere. And I have to be honest, when the Trump administration, and I have fallen into this trap, when they refer to the Western Hemisphere as our hemisphere, I don't honestly like the tone of that, because it's not just our hemisphere, but it's also Canada, Mexico, Venezuela, Argentina. A lot of, if you want to call it the war of words or psychological warfare, a lot of it is based on perceptions. And I have to say, under the Trump administration, we have done a horrible job when it comes to perception management, both on the home front as well as abroad. I mean, we have opportunities to literally foster potentially democratic changes in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Iran. And a part of me is excited about that, but a part of me also feels that the United States under Trump, and really even neoliberalism, is fast becoming a bad actor to our own people as well as that of abroad. When we take a look at Greenland, for example, the way the Greenland situation was handled, I mean, it was terrible. I'm going to be honest with you, Pat, and people can check my X account, my X post. I was at a point where I was sympathizing with EU, because when you look at the Trump administration's discourse and communication with Europe, really and truly, much of it is they want to gain tremendous influence, particularly through some of their big tech allies, into Europe, using various right-wing populist parties. They're trying to separate Alberta from Canada. I know there are issues between the western provinces of Canada versus, let's say, Ontario and Quebec and the rest of the eastern provinces. I know that. My sister's husband, who I really like a lot, he's from Western Canada. He's from British Columbia. So I get it, but and I think quite a bit of it is they want to export the deregulated neoliberal model. In fact, I think it was in the Trump administration's national security strategy and just other posts and communications saying, oh, Europe, they're a stagnant economy, they're not competitive, and they need to deregulate and debureaucratize. I mean, I've been to Europe. I mean, I've been to other countries. They are not stagnant. They are not impoverished. In fact, from what I saw, there's a lot less in the way of poverty and homelessness. They're certainly not perfect societies, and they have their own challenges. But I think it's really galling that the United States, that the Trump MAGA administration just picks on Europe. And meanwhile, I mean, Germany has trade surpluses and is a major net exporter of high technology products. I mean, don't forget, major American airlines use Airbus airlines, elevators exported to the United States are ThyssenKrupp AG, which is a big company, as you know. I mean, so this notion that Europe is just backwards is just ridiculous. Sweden has historically produced very excellent niche weapon systems. The same thing with German weapon system. They're a major exporter and have been for decades upon decades. I can go on and on. So I find that very galling by the Trump administration. Now, one thing the Trump administration in both his first term and some in the second term are correct is how Europe, while proclaiming their solidarity with Ukraine and putting their money where their mouth is with weapons and advisors and diplomatic support, they continue to import and export and conduct trade with Russia and some of Russia's allies, notably China, against Ukraine. For the fact of the matter is, American firms, it's been reported even today, technology firms continue to break the Russia sanctions with very little consequence. And I think that brings us to another point. To show the American people, and you talked about accountability, there needs to be an accountability partially to send the right message to the American people to punch upwards. What I find American political culture is fraught with, and I've been privately sharing you with some texts with some disagreements I have with some people in the community that agree with us on Russia and China. It's a big problem. We need to start punching upwards to the people who have power. I'm not saying physically kill them but jail them if they're proven to break laws. There needs to be accountability because it's really the people in power, individuals that in power, that drive much of our culture, our economic policy, our political policy, our defense policy. And they're the ones that are really also preventing us from having a consistent national security strategy so we can finally contain our adversaries and prevent them from truly being a threat. And what do you think of how Trump MAGA has dealt with Canada? You referenced Carney's speech. I knew exactly what you were talking about because Carney mentioned that the rules-based global order is collapsing. And I was glad that he was saying that. He was saying that, and other European leaders have alluded to that too. In fact, I think I go further. I think Europe needs to go much more economically nationalist. I think Canada needs to dump the Mulroney and Mulroney's successors' abandonment of what Canada used to. Canada, as you know, used to have a policy. It was called the national policy, and that was basically jettisoned by Mulroney, who, by the way, Prime Minister Mulroney pledged to continue it in his election campaign in 1984. The national policy was very similar to the American School of Economics. It was created by conservative Canadian politicians and economists to basically create an economic nationalism of national industries, tariffs, infrastructure, etc. And that was torn apart. I would like to see Canada redevelop that. These countries, they're the NATO countries, they need to basically go, I don't want to say autarkic, but they need to de-risk themselves from the United States. That's how far I'm going. I,
Yeah.
I, I feel guilty going against my own country, but I feel that I don't want the rod of neoliberalism to be imported by Europe. The UK has already dealt with it since Thatcher. We don't want that our European friends to be afflicted with that sickness. What are your thoughts about the Trump administration's dealings with Europe?
Oh, I think, Mr. God, I think they have been so misguided, so clumsy, so offensive in dealing with it as such. It's very clear that one of the things that you have out of Silicon Valley with Musk and others is they want to use the power of the Trump administration to make sales and to lock in monopolies inside Europe. They want to constrain Europe in selling and dealing with us. There is a rebalancing that we need to do with Europe because Europe uses that against our trade, and we have no counter part to that. And that does create a significant advantage for the Europeans. But the fact that we were the leader of NATO and that ally, that gave us substantial influence and substantial advantages inside the EU and inside with the Europeans. And you can see the consequences of that already, where you wind up with Germany, you wind up with Canada, you wind up with Great Britain, now cutting deals with China.
Mm-hmm.
As long as we were friendly, leader, smart, we had, look, the three great trade blocs in the world. There's China, there's the United States, there's Europe. Europe has a larger trade bloc than we do, by the way, and larger than China. And so in combining with China and having a North American bloc of US, Mexico, and China, what we were able to do is have leverage. We could bring in Japan, we could bring in South Korea, we could bring in Taiwan, and we had a formidable economic soft power in dealing with China. We're just squandering that. We're just squandering that. We've created an opening for China to make all of these relationships, and right over the hill is India. India is going to be another China as an economic power. We're squandering dealing with that. And so now you have the Europeans doing deals with Mercosur, the South American nations, and with India. We had created a system that greatly benefited us. Biggest example is the dollar as a reserve. We're squandering all of that. And we will pay an enormous price for it. And why? Why? What is to our advantage to insult the Canadians and say, you are our 51st state, to call the Prime Minister of Canada governor, insult him straight to his face? Why? What advantage does it have? What advantage does it mean for us to have our vice president and Elon Musk, and he was the #1 advisor, go into Germany and support the election of a right-wing political party? The experience in Germany with the creation of right-wing political parties has been a very bad experience for the world, Europe and us. It was. I saw this this comment with the Greenland debacle, and there was the announcement that NATO troops, including German troops, were going to Greenland. And one of the comics said, "This is the first time I was happy to say German troops are coming." The truth is, the stupidity of this, just the ham-handedness of this. this insult presidency is it is doing great harm. It's also doing great harm to the Republican Party.
Oh, it is. And there are, of course, stories that have cropped up where there are Republicans that are quietly really furious, but they, as you said, they cannot do anything because they are literally afraid of elements of the MAGA base for basically taking him out. Because, you know, when I supported Trump, I supported him not because of a cult, as a cult figure. I supported him because he had very good policy ideas, even if they weren't always communicated in the best fashion. I mean, if you don't mind, let me go over it just to give the audience a perspective. He supported trade protectionism. He has been anti-free trade since the 1980s. He has spoken out against the Reagan tax cuts as fuel as deindustrializing, as well as hurting the real estate industry, he said in congressional testimony, by the way. He also was for massive infrastructure improvements, which implies massive public works. He was for the restoration of Glass-Steagall. When he meant drain the swamp, he didn't mean own the liberals and get rid of the leftists, even though he didn't run as a leftist, obviously. He's anti-left, which is fine. He meant basically Wall Street is getting away with murder, to quote one of his tweets at the time. That's what he meant by drain the swamp. Limiting, not eliminating, but limiting the influence of Wall Street and the multinational corporations. He also pledged a tax code where the rich would pay more, and that the middle class and the working class would get lower tax rates. You know, I go on and on. He was running against the Reagan agenda. And I find it very, I don't want to say cute to be sarcastic and cutting, but I find it cute and ironic that his biggest supporters now were back then in 2015 and 2016 his biggest enemies.
Yes.
Like Glenn Beck, like Mark Levin. I'm going to read something just because facts are bullets.
Yes.
And it's very important to go down memory lane, because one of the things I really always love about you, Pat, is you always constantly deploy history in your interviews, whether it's me and whether it's other individuals. And I think that's very important. When we take a look at Trump in 2016, I'm just going down to my Substack here. And Mark Levin, you know who Mark Levin is, of course.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know.
You know, I even when I do agree with things of his that he says on certain issues, I just don't like him personally, how he comes across. He comes across as very obnoxious and mean-spirited. That's just my thing. But so Mark Levin said, in reference to the pro-Trump forces back when Trump was first running for the Republican primary and then president, he warned, "What I see developing is not a conservative coalition, but a coalition on the Republican side of big government advocates. The Republican Party now is a party of the progressive Republicans, Theodore Roosevelt, the protectionists, Ross Perot, Pat Buchanan, the no-growthers." Levin dubbed Trump supporters as a pseudo-morons and phony intellectuals who were believers in, quote, agrarian national populism. I mean, you want to talk about ahistorical nonsense. You know, and others. Glenn Beck was very similar. Glenn Beck was saying Jeb Bush was the most conservative of the candidates. So, I mean, and was supporting Jeb Bush, incidentally. So, you know, there's all these different individuals here. And Mark Levin is now a huge supporter of Trump. The same thing with Ben Shapiro. So it's interesting how they flipped around, because Trump has now become hyper-caffeinated Reaganism. And, you know, especially on the domestic front. And to me, that's just, and he's married this with a jingoistic foreign policy. I mean, Argentina under Javier Milei, I don't know if you've looked at Argentina. The reports are very contradictory, but he had to bail out a failing experiment in libertarianism under Milei.
Right.
They had a, you're probably familiar with that, was the Treasury.
40 billion.
40, yeah. I mean, what gives? So to me, that's what I'm saying. There needs to be somehow a counter movement. And I think it's going to take, as you said, severe economic pain. People are going to look for answers elsewhere. And that's what's going to push these people out. And what needs to happen is it has to be communicated, maybe on a high level like us, and other people can communicate it in a way everyday people can understand, perhaps, but communicate the actual history of what happened. And then we're going to have built-in safeguards to prevent this from ever happening again.
Well, first of all, it's got to be thought out where the policy is not only tight, internally logic, historically based, where it can be implemented, and then it has to be explained in terms where the general population can understand it and know what it means for them, how it will benefit them. Great leaders like Teddy Roosevelt, Lincoln, an FDR, an Eisenhower could do that. That's what we need. But the predicate of all of this is to think it out. It's not thought out at this point. And the Democrats have got to use the next 3 years to deal with that. They need to fill their intellectual cupboard. And as they do that, that will challenge the Republicans. The Republicans need to be able to compete on the basis of ideas, not the pocketbooks of a bunch of billionaires.
I couldn't have said it better, Pat. So when are you running for office again? Let me know.
I'm working, I'm doing some studies. I just did this, and we can talk about this in another session, but I am, as you know, I spent the first third of my career doing state economic development. My doctoral dissertation became the state economic plan of Oklahoma, and then I was hired as the commissioner of Tennessee and put that in. And so I'm going back to that work, and I'm really interested in the role of small business in economic development. There was a period when big business was a major driving force, but as they're moving outside the United States, as they're going to robotics, etc., the role of small businesses in state economic development is very important. And a key fact in that is more than half of all jobs are created by firms of 250 people and less. 25% of those firms fail in the first year, 50% fail in 5 years, and roughly 90% fail in 10 years worth of time. But it is the most dynamic part of our economy. And our system has been built around, in effect, having big business, financial institutions, and has just simply ignored that small business community. And so the question is, as we're thinking about longer term growth, is how do we create an environment and institutions that make it possible for more of those firms to succeed, keep the door open so that entrepreneurs can start to do it, and make it possible for them to make it past the 1, 5, and 10-year marks. And so, that becomes really intriguing. And most important, the major part of what needs to be done there is done at the state level. It needs to be done at the state level.
Right.
And so here's real federalism in action, where you've got an experiment in 50 states and try things to do it. So I'm thinking that through right now, and I'm doing studies getting the data. I've submitted some studies to the Uniform Law Commission, which is doing uniform legislation to have full disclosure on loans that are made to small businesses. So there's a lot we just need a lot of thinking through here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been on my end, and I'm going to be moving to the Miami area by April of this year. And once I'm fully settled, I'm going to be, as we talked about offline, and I've talked about this with other people,
Yeah.
I'm going to be developing my own civic group in person. I'm going to use
Uh-huh.
social media tools like Eventbrite and Meetup,
Uh-huh.
crafted in such a way, and start educating people. And then we can
Good.
then decide action items to lobby and educate other people, have speakers, and we'll see what we can do from there. And I continue to do my writing, my Substack, and I know you've read some of my pieces by now. I always have solutions, which are always,
Yeah. Good things about your work.
yeah, it's a lot of historical. I always ground my solutions and my ideas more on historically what has worked in this country as well as other free countries, but especially here at home. And I just go from there. I'm excited to do the in real life group. It's funny you mentioned that about small business because for work, because I'm the manager at the Lauderhill Central Park Library here in Barrett County, and twice a month I go to different community groups, one of which is the Greater Lauderhill Chamber of Commerce. Sat in a meeting there, and they were talking about the very points about small business and hitting every point on how many jobs they create, the difficulties they're faced with, sometimes how they're ignored, particularly by national governments, and that by the federal government, they're not given enough support. So, yeah, this really, it hit a lot of most of the themes that you said, either explicitly or implicitly. So it's kind of funny you mentioned that because I was at a small business chamber of commerce meeting last night, and there's a lot of wonderful people. I say this to the audience. A lot of wonderful people in those chambers. They really are a treasure. I mean, here in this show, we're pro-capitalist, but we're pre-Reagan capitalism and entrepreneurship, not merely get-rich-quick schemes.
Yeah, greed.
Greed, exactly. Any closing comments you wanted to make, Pat, before we?
I enjoyed the session. It's very stimulating. I have a suggestion that I'd like us to talk about at some future session.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a topic of a dinner conversation I had with several friends last night.
Mm-hmm.
I have two grandkids. I have four grandkids. Two have finished school, finished college, and one is a junior. Another will be a freshman next year.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, I am concerned that they become well-informed people, that they develop the skills to think, that they appreciate fact-based discussions. And so the question is, how can an old grandfather with young grandsons, and I would do it, I'd say the same thing for granddaughters if I had them, but I don't, is what can you suggest to them that they begin to read on a regular basis, understand the short attention spans of the generation created by the use of smartphones? What publications would you recommend that they read? What sort of a discipline, what sort of books would be a background? And start with the assumption that they're not going to get it in any major university.
I'm just writing this down so we don't forget. We can discuss that for the next show. That's a heavy thought. That's like saying I walk into a restaurant, like a Japanese restaurant, and say, what are you going to have? And you're overwhelmed with so many different choices of great food. That is honestly, Pat, that is a very challenging question. We can talk it through on a show and just go on to open to detours. So, one of the things, and, I'm not trying to be personally insulting to anyone, any guests on the program, audience members or whatnot, but I am changing the focus a little bit of the show where I retain a lot of my core principles, but some of the guests, Pat, we talked about it before. I'd like to have you on as a semi-regular guest as much as possible.
Look forward to it. Love the discussion.
Yeah, I loved it too. Alrighty, so thank you so much, Pat, for joining us. Where can people find your works, your books, your other published works?
Most of it, the articles, the congressional testimony, just go to the internet. It's free. It's available.
Yep, and also go to Amazon.com to make sure to buy Pat Choate's book. You got Dangerous Business, Saving Capitalism.
Well, what I recommend, they're all listed on Amazon, or most of them on Amazon. Go to the used book sections. You can buy them for $1, $1.50. Most in good shape.
I have several on my bookshelf, so I got 3 of your books on my book, and I bought them from Amazon.
Yeah,
all right, Pat, I'm going to stop the show. Thank you all for joining us. Happy New Year. Be safe. Let's pray and hope for a better America. I know we can do it. Let's just stick together and continue to fight for a better future. Pat, there's just 1 or 2 items I just want to discuss after I end the recording here.
Okay, good.
All right.